Hello, I'm Sky Matsuhashi, founder of SmartPokerStudy.com, the place for poker players who are always striving to be better today than they were yesterday. Poker people, I hope you caught episode 104, where I kicked off this 3-bet MED by discussing 3-bet essentials, what it is, why we do it, and the important considerations before we click that raise button. Hey, poker people, it's been over a week since the last podcast was released, and I'm sorry for the delay. So sorry, in fact, that we'll just dive right into it right now with value 3 bets. Okay, so to overview this episode, of course, you already know that a value 3-bet is your chance to build the pot pre-flop with the likely better hand. You've got the goods, so you might as well go for the value as soon as possible. But we can't just go firing 3-bets willy-nilly with any top 5% hand. There are 5 things that we'll talk about today, 5 things that you need to consider before we click that raise button, and they are, number 1, the opponent. Number 2, the likely range they'll continue with. Number 3 is the positions. Number 4, bet sizing. And number 5, having a post-flop plan. On top of those 5 considerations, I'll discuss why we often make the value 3-bet instead of just calling, but I'll also get into some reasons why we might want to disguise our hand by calling instead of 3-betting. And I'll also cover one of my favorite learning concepts, mastery versus overload. This is perfectly applicable to your poker studies, and many of you are beginning that journey here with this minimum effective dose series, so this is a perfect thing to discuss with you to get you started, on the journey correctly. Make sure you hit the show notes page for everything I discussed today, along with screenshots and links at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod105. While you're there, you can sign up for the weekly boost for exclusive poker strategy direct to your inbox. Okay, let's get to this. Gambate!
And now for our feature presentation.
So we'll begin by talking about mastery versus overload. And with all the poker content out there, in the form of podcasts, books, videos, articles, and different coaching, it's really easy to get distracted by the quote-unquote shiny new thing that comes across your Twitter or Facebook feed, or wherever you get your poker strategy fix. The way I get around this is to pick one thing to study for a week at a time, and I do it for 1 hour per day, and I ignore everything else that comes my way. So the concept of mastery versus overload is the reason why each MED is broken up into parts. If I did it all at once, you'd be overwhelmed with all the information. A little bit each week gives you something to learn and to study more in detail on your own during your study sessions, for the week between the podcasts. If I did all 10 MEDs, 1 episode each week over 10 weeks, you wouldn't put much of it into use in your own games. By breaking each up into bite-sized chunks, I give you enough to think about, to study further, and to implement into your own games week by week. Poker's about making gradual improvements and working on one skill at a time while building upon previously studied skills and topics. That's the best way to improve your game. And one thing that I've always found true for myself and for most everybody out there, people overestimate what they can do in a day, but they underestimate what they can do in a year. Imagine what your game would be like 1 year from now if you spent 1 week each on 52 different skills. Imagine that, 52 different skills building upon each other and making you one incredible poker player. Your goal with poker learning should be to master one thing at a time before moving on to the next. To help myself achieve this, I keep a daily study document in Word where I take note on what I study day by day. At the bottom of the document, I have a section called Future Studies, and this is where I list ideas for other study topics that occur to me, or I'll even put links to videos or articles that come across that I come across as I'm doing whatever I do on a daily basis, and those links, the articles, and the notes in the future studies, they are all there for me to hit up in the future to continue my studies. And this keeps me on track and helps to prevent overload while promoting mastery of the specific skill or the topic that I'm studying this week. And what I recommend that you do is study one topic per week, just like I do, but begin with the end in mind. Have an ultimate goal and figure out what you need to master to achieve that goal. So I want to see you get on the mastery versus overload train. If you need any help, just send me an email. Okay, let's dive into value 3-bets, the topic du jour of this podcast. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from this podcast is that a value 3-bet wants action. Let me repeat that. A value 3-bet wants action. Please keep this idea in mind through the rest of the podcast because it really is integral to everything that I'll discuss today. If you are value 3-betting with, let's say, pocket jacks maybe, it's because your opponent can continue with pocket tens or worse, or lots of non-paired hands that you currently beat. If you're value 3-betting with ace-queen, it's because your opponent can continue with so many worse aces, ace-jack through ace-9 maybe, or every single ace. And if they can continue with worse aces than that ace-queen that you have a great card advantage for post-flop play. And you are building the pot now with a hand that beats their continuation range. That is key. Build that pot while the value is there for your hand. And like I mentioned at the start of the show, there are 5 considerations that we need to think about before we click that raise button. Number 1 was the opponent. Number 2, the likely range they'll continue with. Number 3, the positions. Number 4, the bet sizing. And number 5, having a post-flop plan. So let's hit each of these right now.
Number 1.
The opponent. So the player that you are 3-betting, it really makes a huge difference who or what type of player that is, and it determines whether or not you'll get the value that you're looking for. And that's the key word here in this whole podcast is value. When you've got a value hand, and you can often think queens are better and ace-king usually, When you've got that value hand, you want an opponent that can continue with worse. If the opponent folds to your 3-bet, then you've earned money pre-flop. If they call, we can expect to win more money from post-flop action with that superior hand. And if you're playing live poker, in a card room, brick and mortar place, you've got to use your judgment and past experiences with the player. If you're online, you use these as well, but you want to include the stats in your HUD, the stats on your opponent. The most value will come from loose and passive players. The more loose and passive they are, the more value you can get out of them. And you can also extract lots of value from those loose aggressive, those lags out there, These players will continue with a wide range, hoping that you'll fold to a 4-bet bluff, or they'll call in hopes of taking it away from you post-flop with aggression. And the hardest ones to extract value from are tags and nits. And if you remember, tags are tight aggressive players, and nits are the guys that play hardly any hands, and when they do, they're really strong hands, And tags, they fold to 3-bets quite frequently, and they only continue with a very small range, whether they're calling or they're 4-betting with it. And nits continue with even smaller ranges and will fold pretty quickly to 3-bets unless they've got like a top 3% hand. Think jacks are better and ace-king. So you need to target the right players who can give your 3-bet the value you're looking for. And of course, when we talk about players, we've got to talk about the ranges that they'll continue with.
Number 2.
Their continuation range. So if we aren't ahead of their continuation range, even though it may be a quote-unquote value hand, then our 3-bet is basically a bluff. If we're 3-betting pocket jacks, and this is ahead of the villain's opening range, but we know from past experience and their stats, we know they only continue with maybe pocket queens or better, and maybe not even ace-king, then our 3-bet will only elicit folds unless he's got queens or better, in which case, if that's the case, pocket queens versus our pocket jacks, we are way behind. Against a player like this, we can be profitable with 3-betting any 2 cards as a bluff, and that's basically what we're doing here, even though we have pocket jacks. And like I said in the prior podcast number 104, all 3-bets are either for value or they're for a bluff. If the opponent only continues with hands that beat yours, then you're bluffing. When you're facing an open raise, your 3 options are to fold, call, or raise. So thinking about that pocket jacks hand, these really are too good to fold. But if the villain will only continue with pocket queens, what should we do? Well, you can 3-bet and expect him to fold out all worse hands. And that's not necessarily bad because, you're going to find out right away if you're beat or not, and most likely you'll just win the pot pre-flop. That's not a bad outcome. The other choice, assuming we won't fold such a strong pre-flop hand with those pocket jacks, is to just call. This keeps villain's entire opening range in play on the flop, and it allows us to possibly extract some great post-flop value with our strong pocket pair from his weaker opening range. But you have to be careful when calling, though. Your call could elicit calls from other players not yet in the pot. Now, if that happens, you're seeing a multi-way flop with pocket jacks. And at that point, it's tough to know if you're ahead when you're up against 3, 4, or 5 players. So weigh your options before you click that raise or call button. And have a good idea of the range your opponent will continue with. You've got to know why you're making the 3-bet. That is key. Always know why you're 3-betting. And of course, when you're 3-betting for value, position is king.
Number 3.
The positions. I've got to mention this even though we all know about it, Poker is all about position, position, position. When 3-betting for value, having post-flop position means you'll be able to extract more value and be able to get away from more dangerous spots. Position is power. It is control. It is being in charge of the hand. And in PokerTracker 4, I just ran a cash game filter through my database, and I ran it for 3-betting hands with position after the flop and out of position after the flop. So what it came back with was in position, I had 263 hands came through the filter and $243 in profit. That's 92 cents in profit per hand, and that's 836 big blinds per 100 hands played. That's pretty darn good, 92 cents per hand. That means, when I'm 3-betting in position, I'm actually making almost $1 per hand when I do that. My biggest losing hand was 140 big blinds, and that was with pocket tens where I flopped top set and the other guy flopped a nut flush. I mean, there's not much I can do there, It would be difficult to get away from a nut flush on the flop when I still have a chance to get a full house, but whatever, it happens. And my biggest winning hand was 106 big blinds, but I just had a lot of 100 big blind hands, nothing compared to that 140 big blind loss, but I had a lot more full stack wins there, And when I filtered for out of position, I got 209 hands returned. And this is good, it's less, the number of hands is less than the in position 3-bets, which means I'm a little more selective when I'm 3-betting out of position, which is good. When you're out of position, you need to be more selective in your hands because you don't want to see a lot of flops out of position. But out of those 209 hands, I had $155 profit, which is 74 cents per hand. And that's, of course, not bad at all. It's not as good as the 92 cents per hand when in position, but 74 ain't bad. And it was also 833 big blinds per 100 hands played. So pretty good win rate there, too. And out of these 209 hands, the vast majority of these came from the blinds, but some came from 3-betting, then getting called by a player in the cutoff or the button. You can't always avoid that. It's going to happen sometimes. My biggest winning hand was 123 big blinds with lots of 100 big blind wins and, a lot of wins also between 90 and 100 big blinds. That was great. And my biggest losing hand was 112 big blinds, to be expected right there when I'm 3-betting with a value hand. So you can see the difference in profitability here when 3-betting with and without post-flop position. Like I said, 92 cents per hand in position and 74 cents per hand out of position. Much better in position right there. So I would say that 3-betting in position with a value hand is definitely a bread and butter situation. And your position in relation to the villains should be a factor in your chosen 3-bet sizing.
Number 4.
Bet sizing. So in general, we all know this, bigger bets get folds and smaller bets get calls. I recommend making most of your 3-bets 3 times the opening raise for in-position play and 3.5 to 4 times for out-of-position play. So, if it's a 3 big blind open you're facing, in position, make it 9, and out of position, make it anywhere between about 10 to 12 or so big blinds out of position. You want to charge the guys for having position on you post-flop. But here are some reasons to increase your sizing even more for value 3-bets. Let's say the opener will call bigger bets with worse hands. Some players will call any 3-bet with the same weak range, so they'll call 3x or 4x or even 5x 3-bets. Whatever sizing you think they'll call with, and assuming they're calling with worse hands, go for that sizing. Remember, it is a value 3-bet, so try to get as much value as you can, as soon as you can. And another reason to increase your sizing even more is maybe there are still players yet to act other than the 2-better. There's limpers maybe and blinds. So you want to make it enough to get them out of the hand and isolate that raiser. If a standard 3x raise gets 3 callers besides the raiser, then you'd probably have to make it 3.5 or 4 to isolate that guy. And, another reason to increase your sizing would be you're raising out of position and you want to charge your opponents to call you in position like I already discussed. You want them to pay for that incredible advantage. Remember, the 3 advantages are card advantage, skill advantage, and positional advantage. So if you're 3-betting out of the blinds against a cutoff opener, you are possibly giving him positional advantage, so make your sizing bigger. And here are some reasons to lower your sizing for value 3-bets. Maybe you think the raiser won't call a standard 3x 3-bet, and he won't do so with worse hands, so size it smaller to entice him to call or to 4-bet over you. Or maybe you've got an aggro donk who's yet to act, and you think a smaller 3-bet will convince him to 4-bet bluff over you, to scare you and the original raiser out of the pot. And by doing that, let's say he does throw that 4-bet bluff when you have your pocket aces. Well, that allows you to call and go post-flop, or even 5-bet to extract max value from this aggro donk pre-flop. Before you choose your bet sizing, you've got to consider what odds it offers your opponent and the break-even range they normally continue with. For example, a standard 3-bet of 3x to 9 big blinds means the opener has to call 6 big blinds to win a total pot of 19.5 big blinds. And that, of course, includes both 9 big blind bets and the small blind and big blind. So this means that their hand needs only 30.8% equity against your range. Remember, that's just 6 divided by 19.5. If we look at a small 3-bet range of 4.7%. So that's like if you're 3-betting only 10s or better and ace-queen or better. There are a lot of hands that have at least 30.8% equity against it. So, you can do this in Flopzilla for yourself, of course, but against that 4.7% range, pocket deuces, ace-jack suited, or better, ace 4 and ace 5 suited, ace queen offsuit or better, king 10 suited or better, 10-9 suited or better, and even jack 9 suited or better. They all have at least that 30.8% equity. So if you size it bigger, their hand needs more equity, and sizing your 3-bet smaller means they need less. Consider this before you make that 3-bet. And, of course, with all this 3-betting value talk, we've got to discuss the inevitable post-flop action that can occur. And you've got to have a plan for this before you click that raise button.
Number 5.
Having a post-flop plan. So, all great poker players have a plan for further action or future streets before they act. Look before you leap is an important concept within poker. Having a post-flop plan before you 3-bet pre-flop means you're thinking about the possible flops that can come. You're also thinking about your opponent's range and their post-flop tendencies. Of course, you also need to know how you'll respond to a pre-flop 4-bet. If you, and we've all done this, if you 3-bet, then puke in your mouth when you face that 4-bet, then you probably didn't plan for it to happen and shouldn't have made the 3-bet in the first place. You didn't consider all the possibilities of making that 3-bet. And sometimes you hit the flop super hard with a set of jacks, or maybe top pair top kicker with your ace king. It's time to extract maximum value when this happens. You want to think about how your opponent plays post-flop, how aggressive or passive or nitty they might be. History and your HUD stats will tell you how wide they call C-bets, and how often they check raise, or how often they raise C-bets, and how often they donk bet into you. Think about the player's tendencies and devise a strategy that will earn you more of their chips. And sometimes you'll be up against an opponent that likes to bluff post-flop. Maybe you'll want to give this opponent a chance to show you that he's got the goods, a chance to try to bluff you off your hand. So a check might be in order, or even a check behind if you're in position. And another thing, on scary boards, like maybe it's a monotone board or 3 to the straight, and you have the overpair. If you try to force the action to get it in by the river, then you might not be able to fold when indications are that you're beat. If you bet half your stack on the turn, and you're doing this in order to build the pot to get all in on the river, and if he raises you, then you're probably beat even with a top pair top kicker hand, and you may not be able to find the fold button with so much of your stack already in the pot. So bet smaller so he can at least call and give you value, or he might raise you and tell you that, hey buddy, you're beat, you've got to fold. If you're overcommitted to the pot at any time, you'll have a harder time laying down when you're beat. Everybody talks about being pot committed. We've all mentioned it. I personally don't like to think of myself ever as pot committed. I really shouldn't care about how much money I've already invested in the pot. What matters is my opponent's range, the board, and how well my hand plays versus my opponent's likely card strength there. And something else to think about is what to do when you see an overcard on the flop. Many players are so worried about overcards coming, and those overcards often ruin the equity of your beautiful 3-betting hand. Pocket jacks, queens, or kings. It's terrible when one of those overcards comes. And something that you need to realize is that when you have pocket kings, 20% of the time an ace hits the flop, When you got queens, 34% of the time, an ace or a king will hit the flop. And when you have pocket jacks, a whopping 42% of the time, an ace, a king, or a queen will hit the flop. So when you have one of these pairs and an overcard comes, you have to think about how many of that card, that particular rank, your opponent has in their range. And you can do this for yourself in Flopzilla, but let's look right now, a quick example. Let's look at the number of aces, kings, and queens a small 3-bet calling range has. Let's look at a small calling range of 5%, and you can see a screenshot of this in the show notes. So let's say he opens, you 3-bet, and he calls you, and you think he has about a 5% range of pocket eights through jacks, ace queen or ace jack, king queen, ace queen suited to ace jack suited, and king queen suited. And once again, you can see a screenshot of this in the show notes. That is 72 combos of hands that he could have. Within this range, 32 aces, which are the ace queen and the ace jack. That's 44% of his range has an ace. He's got 16 kings in his range with the king queen, and that's 22% of the range. And he has 32 queens, which is 44% of the range. And that's the ace queen and the king queen in the range. And altogether, this range has 48 aces, kings, and queens, making for 67% of the range. This means that if an ace, a king, or a queen hits the flop, there's a 67% chance your opponent has one. So if you c-bet the flop with the overcard showing, you're getting called or raised possibly 67% of the time. So, I said there were 16 kings in his range. So kings aren't too big a worry on the flop. But aces and queens make up a bigger part of that range with 32 aces and 32 queens in it. So c-betting on an ace or queen high board when you have pocket jacks can be troublesome. Now, that doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't c-bet, but just be prepared for the villain to continue beyond your c-bet if they're calling pre-flop with such a narrow and Broadway-filled range. Let me tell you about Habwin.com. Habwin, Habwin.com. Do you like online poker? What if you could win prizes at zero cost to you? With Habwin, you can play free, exclusive $100 free rolls on Party Poker and BWin. Check out our winter free rolls. Every Sunday at 8 p.m. Central European Time, jump at the opportunity to win extra cash completely for free. Register now at www.habwin.com/free rolls and start the fun. Once again, that's www.habwin.com/free rolls. And it's time for a quick Patreon plug. If you support me on Patreon, you can get some exclusive poker strategy content that I won't deliver anywhere else. There are different levels of support, and with each level comes different exciting rewards. At $5, you get a Patreon exclusive podcast. At $15, you get the podcast and a training video. And at the magnificent $50 level, you get the podcast, video, and a full 1.5-hour webinar. So to learn more or to support me, please visit www.patreon.com/smartpokerstudy. And a quick shout out, Rob is the man. No, not Gronkowski, not Lowe, not Schneider, nor even Zombie. None of those Robs compare with Rob Ribeiro. He decided to support me on Patreon, and I love him for that. His support is better than Gronkowski's football acumen, better than Lowe's good looks, better than Schneider's acting, and better than Zombie's music. Rob Ribeiro is the wind under my wings, and I thank him for the lovely monthly support he's pledged through Patreon. If you want to be like Rob, get on the Patreon bandwagon, people. Alrighty, back to class. So, I've got a question for you. Should I ever call with a value-worthy hand? Great question, me. Now, like I said earlier, there are 3 things you can do when facing an open raise. You can fold, call, or 3-bet. Your job is to determine which is the most positive EV and go with it. When you think about a hand like pocket aces, that's definitely the strongest possible pre-flop hand, so it's always positive EV to 3-bet that sucker. But there are times when you might want to call with a value hand instead of 3-betting, and here are 5 possible times to do so. Number 1, to disguise your hand strength. So calling an open raise will often convince players you don't have queens or better, and you can sneak attack their stack when your hand is under-repped like that. Reason number 2 to just call instead of 3-bet. You do so that you can have your entire range in your 2-bet calling range. If you never call 2-bets with pocket queens or better, then you've capped your range at pocket jacks when you do make that 2-bet call. This makes it easier for opponents to play against your 2-bet calls. Players at the micros and low stakes might not realize this, but it's something to think about as you move up in stakes. So reason to just call number 3, to allow your opponent to continue on to post-flop play with their entire opening range. So this is great if you're 3-betting a player who opens 20%, let's say, but maybe he only continues with that, that 3% range, the pocket queens or better and ace king. When you've got ace king, he'll have every ace in his range, and on a flopped ace, you can extract lots of value from their weak ace heavy range when you just call him pre-flop instead of 3-betting and getting him to fold. So reason number 4 to just call instead of 3-bet is you're not worried about isolating. Maybe you're the last to act, or those yet to act are nitty and will likely fold to the open raise sizing. And the final reason to just call instead of 3-betting. Maybe you have an opponent who is yet to act, and they are a constant 3-bet squeezer. This guy gives you nightmares. He 3-bet squeezes so much. Well, you can use this against you. So looking at the current hand you're in, maybe it's a great opportunity for this opponent to make that 3-bet squeeze to blow you all out of the pot. So you could just call now, then pounce on his 3-bet squeeze with a lovely value 4-bet, or even call him and take his stack post-flop. Okay, so I can hear all of you now. The question that you're asking is, how do I study value 3-betting over the next week in an effort at mastery? Well, great question. I love it. Thank you very much. There are so many ways to look at your 3-bet hands in PokerTracker 4, and here are a few of the filters that you can use. Of course, just your general pre-flop actions and opportunities filter, and then turning on the any 3-bet filter. Bam! All the hands that you've 3-bet, they pop up for your review. Which positions are you profitable in, and which are you losing money in? So go through those hands and do some reviews. You can also couple this, the 3-bet filter, you can couple that with specific hands or a range of hands to see how well you performed. Filter for 3-bets with the cutoff value hands like pocket tens, pocket jacks, ace queen, and ace king. Sometimes those are questionable value hands. You're not sure if you're value betting or just making a bluff with those hands. So you could filter for those specific hands and see how profitable you are with how you play them. Also, you want to look at always valuable hands like queens, kings, and aces. How well do you perform with these? What were your biggest losing hands, and could you have gotten away from them at some point in the hand, whether pre-flop or post-flop? It's possible you 3-bet, then 5-bet when you should have known your opponent's 4-bet could only mean pocket aces. And filter for 3-bet hands both in position on the flop and out of position on the flop. You can find the position choices under hand details and player position. How are you doing in those 3-bet pots both in position and out of position? And you can also do some studying for value 3-bets from some outside sources. So I want you to spend 15 minutes in Google and YouTube or even your favorite poker training site. And you want to search for some great quote-unquote value 3-bet or 3-betting for value content. Type those into your search bars there. There's tons of it out there. So copy and paste each URL that looks promising into your study document and hit each of them this week. Take note of what you learn and find ways to apply it to the tables this week. Challenge! So here's my challenge to you for this episode. Over the next week, decide if the 3-bet that you're about to make is for value or a bluff before you make it. Use a tick sheet as you play and record the number of value 3-bets and the number of bluff 3-bets you make. Your awareness of how often you're going for value versus how often you're bluffing will inform your 3-bet choices, and the more aware you are, the better decisions you'll make. If you're going for value, you should be able to look down at your hand and then list off the weaker hands that you think your opponent can continue with. If there aren't any weaker hands and they'd only continue with better hands, then you're actually just 3-bet bluffing. This isn't a bad thing though. You just need to work on knowing why you're making the 3-bet and what constitutes a value versus a bluff 3-bet. Now it's your turn to take action and scrappy-dappy do something positive for your poker game.
Now get it on.
So to recap the episode, I said it before and I'll say it again. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this podcast, it's that a value 3-bet wants action. This is super important. A desire for anything else means you're just bluffing. I discussed the 5 considerations that go into making value 3-bets, and they were, number 1, the opponent. You want to target the right players that can give you value after you make the 3-bet and not just fold outright every single time. Number 2, the likely range they'll continue with. Knowing their continuance range will help you assess how well they hit the flop. And number 3, the positions. 3-betting, whether for value or as a bluff, is always more profitable when you're doing so in position. Number 4 was bet sizing. Make 3x 3-bets in position and 3.5x to 4x 3-bets out of position. Know that the bigger the bet, the more likely you'll get a fold, and smaller bets get more calls. But beware not to give your opponent too good a price to continue in the hand. And the final consideration for making value 3-bets is having a post-flop plan. Planning for further action or future streets is the hallmark of all great poker players. So have a plan before you throw out that value 3-bet. I also cover some reasons why you might want to call instead of 3-bet. Remember, you always want to make the most positive EV decision. And even with a value hand like pocket aces, there might be a really good reason to call instead of 3-bet. Paying attention to the player still involved is crucial in maximizing the value from any hand that you're dealt. And I also discussed one of my favorite learning concepts, mastery versus overload. Don't get distracted by that quote-unquote shiny new thing out there. Stick with one topic per week to study and exhaust all avenues and strive for mastery before you move on to the next. 52 weeks of deep diving into 52 different topics will make you a far better player 1 year from now than if you let your studies meander here and there throughout the year. So if you're not already there, head on over to the show notes at smartpokerstudy.com/pod105 for screenshots and links to everything mentioned today. Thank you so much for listening. I want your feedback, so hit me with it through the show notes, or you can also send an email to sky@smartpokerstudy.com or post in the Facebook group at www.smartpokerstudy.com/discuss. And one more quick shout out today to Steve W. He purchased my Smart HUD for PokerTracker 4 and is already putting it to use. I sent him links to lots of different YouTube videos where I show my HUD in action, and he's begun his journey to online poker excellence. If you've already got PokerTracker 4 and want my Smart HUD for yourself, for both cash games and MTT or sit and go play, head on over to www.smartpokerstudy.com/smarthud to learn more and to purchase. Thanks for that support, Steve. And of course, I want to thank our show sponsor today, habwin.com. Check out their winter free rolls every Sunday, 8 p.m. Central European Time. Visit www.habwin.com/free rolls to learn more and to register for free. Alrighty, poker people, be sure to come back next week for the third class in the 3-bet yin-yang MED, where we will get into upping your aggression with some 3-bet bluffs and semi-bluffs. And yes, there is a difference between bluffing and semi-bluffing. Word of mouth is the best advertising, so thank you very much for sharing the show with other poker people. Your sharing and caring is what helps it grow. Until next time, study smart, play much, and make your next session the best one yet.